Commissioner Lori Cox,
Present.
Commissioner Hosford. Here. Commissioner Messersmith,
Here.
Commissioner Neesmith.
He's here.
He's here. Commissioner O'Keefe,
Present.
Commissioner Maddox, Commissioner Minor,
Here.
Commissioner Matlow,
Here.
and Commissioner Williams Cox.
Here. Do you have any agenda modifications, Mr. Slay?
No, ma'am, we do not.
Oh, I'm here.
Well, hey, he doesn't have a card.
sorry.
He didn't get to talk. so-
Richardson.
Okay.
Good. Happy Monday.
That's okay.
There he is. You came back to the fold?
Yeah, there's Neesmith.
All right, perfect. No agenda modifications. Any public comment on items not appearing on the agenda?
We had no speakers.
Okay, we're going to go into number 4, consent agenda.
Move consent.
Second.
Motion and a second. Any discussion? Hearing none, all in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Consent items pulled for discussion? None? Goodness. I'm going to roll right into CRTPA action, and I'm going to turn it over to you, Mr. Slay.
Yes, ma'am. Up first is our update on the Florida Transportation Plan. I'm not sure. Okay. I'll just let you take it.
Thank you. Everyone hear me okay? My name is Casey Johns. I'm with the Florida Department of Transportation, District 3 in Chipley. I'm a project manager with the planning office, and I'm here to discuss the Florida Transportation Plan. The 2055 Florida Transportation Plan update will be a comprehensive statewide blueprint guiding Florida's 30-year transportation future. The FTP's transportation policy lays the foundation for investments in FDOT's work program. Updated every 5 years, the plan will be developed through steering committee guidance, focus group support, and comprehensive community engagement, both partner and public engagement. Plan update will be developed over the next 18 months and adopted in November of 2025. Our goal is that the FTP will be a plan in which Florida's communities can see themselves and our stakeholders can use to develop their transportation plans and strategies. The 2055 FTP will be guided by a streamlined steering committee in collaboration with FDOT to provide input that will guide the development of the goals, objectives, and policies that make up the plan. The 2055 FTP will be one concise document supported by online resources such as story maps and dashboards. All documents and materials will be developed using plain language and concepts. Florida is a large state with many diverse communities. Every community is unique, and each of their contexts, transportation demands, and development patterns are different. Each region has different objectives to meet our common transportation goals, and a one-size approach does not fit all. Florida is home to densely populated coastal communities, a couple of mega regions, and as well as many thriving rural towns and small cities. We have divided Florida into 5 regions for the development of the 2055 Florida Transportation Plan to better understand the needs of our diverse communities and tailor the characteristics and needs of each region. This also helps to provide the framework at the local level so that we have a better cohesion in strategies across municipality and jurisdictional boundaries. The Florida Transportation Plan is more than just a plan. It's a forum that aims to connect communities, policies, and programs across the state. The Florida Transportation Plan is a collaborative effort of state, regional, and local transportation partners in the public and private sectors. The plan will be developed through steering committee guidance, focus group support, and comprehensive community engagement, both partner and public engagement. You can see that the 3 phases across the top of the screen, visioning statewide goals and regional objectives, and implementation framework plan development. The FTP will have statewide goals and regional objectives, empowering our communities to develop local strategies around the FTP's framework. This way, the local strategies will be able to fit within the fabric of each community's unique needs. Communities are at the center of everything FDOT does, and we will be holding multiple engagement opportunities throughout the FTP update, including statewide webinars and regional workshops throughout the state. 5 focus groups provide a forum for more targeted discussion on the statewide goals and regional objectives and provide input to the steering committee. The focus groups are organized around 5 major topic areas that align with FDOT's compass: safety, resilient infrastructure, economic development supply chain, technology, and workforce development. Input on these goals, objectives, and policies that make up the plan is critical to achieving the implementable vision for our future transportation network. This slide shows the overall timeline. You can see the planned time periods for the steering committee meetings, focus groups, public engagement opportunities, and the public comment opportunity forum, September to October of 2025, with the final adoption date for the plan to be November of 2025. Help us develop the 2055 Florida Transportation Plan. Visit floridaftp.com to learn more about the plan and to find out how to get involved. You are encouraged to join a focus group, participate in a webinar or regional workshop, or simply provide your comments and feedback. Join us as we build our transportation future together. I've left a postcard with all of you that has a QR code you can scan to get to the website for more information, and also would like to let you know that our workshop for our district, our Northwest region, will be tomorrow at the Destin Convention Center at 10 a.m., and everyone is invited to join. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Anybody have any questions, discussion? Why does 2055 seem so far away, but it's not? Thank you very much for your presentation. Going to move into CRTPA fiscal year 2023 financial statements.
Our audit and financial statements. I always like to say, all the money's accounted for, nothing missing. So those are my 2 things in audit.
You say that louder into the mic.
Oh, sorry. Say, all the money's accounted for, nothing's missing. So that's the important part. I'm going to hand it off to Suzanne since she was our project manager for the audit, and let her give you a brief introduction.
Thank you very much. Yes, this year, we are now our 5th straight year where there have been no findings in our audit. Thank you. There was a recommendation made last year about some reconciliation to be ongoing. That has been addressed. So again, no recommendations either were put forth this year. And we have Zach Shalafar from James Moore and Company to present the findings on the audit. Thank you.
How about your biggest finding last week?
So yes, Zach Shalafar, partner, James Moore and Company. Might not be the familiar face for some of y'all. I know Ben Clark joined you guys, or the executive committee, about a week and a half ago. He's 7 days now into paternity leave, so you are stuck with me. Real quick, I don't know if it was in the agenda packet. We had these 1 sheets. I did bring extras just in case. So what Suzanne's passing out, that will be really the quick highlights of my comments. I know, again, Ben did review this with the executive committee, so I'll try to keep it very 30,000-foot view. As has been mentioned, the results are very good. The agency is still in a good financial position, so we'll keep it pretty brief and work through the highlights. There's a series of required communications that we do have to make to you all as those charged with governance. The biggest piece first is just kind of the reminder of our responsibility in a financial statement audit, with the fact that the primary objective of this engagement is to take a top-down look at your financial statements. And while we do look at internal controls, over your grant process, cash disbursement process, there's separate audits that would be focused to actually express an opinion on internal controls. Most of your numbers here are pretty black and white, but if there's any estimates, we do have to highlight those. The 2 big estimates, similar to prior years, that don't really impact your operations, your general fund that you really look at, are your net pension liability and OPEB liability, and this relates to really recognizing on what we call your full accrual or government-wide statements, those liabilities, even though, again, there is no operational impact. So we present those numbers really just for informational purposes to comply with accounting standards. The last 2 items here, I always kind of come back to if there were issues in terms of any major audit adjustments, difficulties performing the audit, disagreements with management and so forth, you would hear from us before this stage in the process. So it's very much a no news is good news. With regard to the audit reports, we do issue 5 reports. These are the same as we had the last couple of years. The first one at the very front is the audit opinion on the financial statements, where we did issue an unmodified opinion, which is the best opinion that we can issue, stating that the financial statements are fairly presented in all material respects. The reports in the back are kind of like the how'd you do? Were there any findings, recommendations, items that we came across, any non-compliance? Overall, no issues here, so I'll hit them and kind of the purpose very briefly. The second one is on internal control and compliance, and this relates to your financial reporting process as well as any testing that we look at to say, okay, did you follow your internal control process in cutting checks or payroll activity that we looked at? We had no items identified in this report. The third report, as in prior years, we perform what's called a federal single audit because of the agency's use of grant dollars. We had no issues noted during that testing or any non-compliance with the terms of those grant programs, so a clean report here. And then the last 2 are kind of a catch-all set of items in accordance with state reporting. First, looking at compliance with state statutes over investment activity, investment policies, as well as kind of a catch-all for any other recommendations. If there were financial condition issues, we would highlight those here. We had no such items to report in there as well. Then with regard to the numbers, like most years, it's very much grant money in and similar expenditures out. But in total, your fund balance a little over $150,000. So while you don't have a normal build-up reserves, because it is very much that one-to-one for grant activity, always good to have that little cushion there, which was about 10%, give or take, of your current year grant revenues of almost $1.6 million. And then that last item there, we do note, just to kind of highlight that on the governmental activities statement, the very first, it does show a negative unrestricted, but that's really just due to the presentation of the pension liability and the OPEB liability, which really the obligation there is as you have payroll, you make the required contributions. So that's really an impact of informational numbers, but I always like to highlight that for the record to say, yes, it shows a negative because you present those kind of theoretical liabilities, but really what we focus on is your general fund, where you do have about the $150,000 or so in fund balance. So those are the highlights. As I said, I try to keep it as brief as I can, but I'm more than glad to dive into any questions. And thank you all again for the chance to be here.
Anybody have any questions for Zach? Comments? Thank you very much.
All right. Thanks, y'all.
We're looking for the board for a motion to accept the
Move option 1.
Have a motion and a second. Any discussion? Hearing none, all in favor? Aye. Gonna move into C.
Madam Chair, if I could real quick, I just want to thank Patrick Twyman. He's the City of Tallahassee's Director of Financial Services. He and his team do a lot of the work on this for us, especially gathering the financial information and our the various data and forms that we need for this. So really, they do a lot of the heavy lifting on this. So thanks to Patrick and his entire team.
Thank you very much. We're going to move into C.
Lex is
Already ready.
ready to go.
Ready to go? Is it possible to bring this up on the screen or not? I'm sorry. From the agenda?
The agenda item?
Thank you, everybody, for this opportunity. While they're bringing that up on the screen so everybody in the audience has an opportunity to look what was in the agenda packet, I just want to highlight that this year, we're very pleased to announce that our overall increase in operating is at 2.7%. Costs have leveled off, and some changes in personnel showed a reduction in those personnel increases, so it's only a 2.4% overall. 2 employees reduced the health coverage because they had children that had aged out from coverage. And then also, our increase this year was 4.2% versus 5%. So when you're comparing last year to this year, there is a reduction there as well. So the overall change in personnel costs is 2.4%. Moving into operating, attachment 1, if you can scroll down just a couple pages, please. There we go. Thank you very much. In attachment 1 in the operating expenditures, the overall increase is at 1.6%. There were changes in this area. We reduced our coverage, the amount, I'm sorry, that we budgeted for our memberships because we sort of leveled off at what those are annually. There were some small increases in our food and unclassified supplies. We went back to the pre-COVID levels for our food budget. And in the unclassified supplies, we anticipate buying some promotional material to support the public engagement for the long-range transportation plan. So those 2 items are really the only increases you see of significance. Our auditing and accounting services, I've budgeted at $21,000, but that contract is going to be set in February. So again, that was just an estimated budget. And overall, the increase of 1.6%, I'm just very pleased after the past few years where costs have been much higher. Lastly, going into the internal service fund, some adjustments have been made based upon our actual usage of these services. And you see an increase in the accounting expense. And that goes to the fact that we now have both grants and finance working together with us for the oversight of our finances and the financial management system. And again, we really think that that's money well spent. We get excellent customer service from our partners at the city, and thank you very much, Patrick, and your team. Attachment 2, is there any questions on this first one? Right, attachment 2 is just an overview of our budget for projects, and that amount, that 1.685, is fluid each year. It just depends on how much what work we're going to do, how much money we are allocated. So that number will change every year. And therefore, I did not plug that number in the beginning, but when you go to attachment 3, we did enter that unclassified contractual services number in, and it shows that there's a 16% increase, but that's not a real change. That just is the amount of money, the difference between last year and this year. And I just wanted to show you that number in entirety, because it really is not a 10% increase overall. So with that, take any questions?
We would be looking for approval for the budget.
Second.
Maddox and Commissioner Minor, thank you very much. Any discussion? All in favor? Aye.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Going to move into D, please.
Pass this off to Mr. Drew, who is our regional mobility plan or long-range transportation.
That'd be me. So similar to the Florida Transportation Plan, which takes a look at the entire state for updating their system-wide plan, we are starting our long-range transportation plan for adoption at about a similar time as the FDP in November of next year. With that, we've gone through the process of selecting consultant, which is Kittleson and Associates, and we have Franco Saracino here, and where's Tyrone? Tyrone Scorsone? He's got a name similar to mine. I can't pronounce it. But anyway, here's Franco, and he's going to give you a brief update on the plan, kind of an overview. We just started this about 2 months ago, so we are moving into a very heavy data collection effort at this point and starting our public engagement. And all those documents, particularly the public engagement, will be providing a lot of opportunities for citizens to be involved, and that's going to kick off in October. And I'll let Franco, before I step on any of the slideshow, take over from here. So, Franco, it's all yours.
All right. Thank you, Jack. So my name is Franco Saraceno. I'm with Kittleson and Associates. And the presentation I'm going to share with you today is very high level, just focusing on the who, what, why, when of this process, just kind of kicking off this long-range plan process. So starting with the project management team, as Jack said, I'll be the project manager. I've got about 23 years of experience doing transportation planning, have completed about 15 LRTPs for MPOs across the state. So I'm very excited to bring that experience to bear and share some of those experiences with the Capital Region to put together a great long-range plan. Also joined by Tyrone Scorsone. He's going to be playing the role of Deputy Project Manager on the study. Tyrone heads up our local office, as many of you know, and has about 17 years experience managing a variety of complex contracts, both FDOT as well as MPO contracts. Our management team also includes Elle Tedder. Oh, I'm sorry. Elle Tedder is going to be, is with Val Stern. She's going to be heading up our public engagement process. Elle is a local native, born and raised in Tallahassee, so nobody knows the communities of the region better than Elle, so we're excited that she has joined us in engaging the public effectively in this process. So our team, again, Kittleson is the prime consultant. We'll oversee all project activities and manage the team. Again, Val Stern is our public engagement firm. They're going to be very engaged from the very beginning. We're also joined by Benish, and Benish will support the development of a performance framework. One of the unique things about this plan update is that we're going to use a data-driven process, all performance-based analysis, to identify the needs, to prioritize our investments moving forward. We're also joined by CTS to support data collection, and HAF, who will provide transportation system management and operation support. In these times when dollars are short and needs are not, I think that operational strategies are going to play an important part in this plan update. So the approach that we're going to take, this is a convoluted flow chart. I'm not going to get into the details of it, but I want to call your attention to those green boxes. Those, I think, are the highlights of this process. Starting with public engagement, as Jack mentioned, the goal is to maximize the number of voices that are heard in this process. And we're going to use a variety of methods, including over a dozen engagements out in the communities, through workshops, attending community events, online surveys, and a variety of other tools that Val Stern brings to our team. The next key box is needs assessment. And I intentionally use the word insightful here to describe that performance-based process that we're going to be building that I think will inform this plan, but will also be a leave behind for the CRTPA to use in other efforts. So this is a systems planning effort, but we're going to be looking at the entire network through a variety of lenses that are represented by the plan goals and objectives. The culmination of the process, as most of you know, is the cost feasible plan. That's that federal requirement to have a cost and revenue balanced plan. And this is going to be an optimization exercise. Again, dollars are short, revenues are down relative to the last plan update. So it's going to be really important to understand the priorities, to look for those operational improvements, to do more with less. One of the caveats to that is that I know that there are a number of what I call pipeline projects that have already been invested in pre-construction phases, whether it's right-of-way, preliminary engineering, other project development phases. And so those projects will rise to the top so that we maintain those efforts. In terms of the schedule, the goal, as Jack mentioned, is to adopt the plan by November of 2025. That's actually not the goal, that's the requirement. So we will be adopting by November of next year. Public involvement will run throughout the process. That's what's taken up most of our time right now, is setting up that public involvement process. We're also focused on establishing those guiding principles, the goals and objectives that will be quantitatively used to guide the process, and in a couple months we'll have that finished up. The plan development phase is where all the technical work happens. The framework is developed, all the data analysis happens, And we're hoping to finish that by March, April of next year, followed by the cost feasible plan. And the goal is to have a draft cost feasible plan by next summer that we'll come back and share with you. And then that'll give us enough time to tweak and make adjustments as necessary before final adoption. And then, of course, documentation, all of the required documentation will be done along the way, building up to the final plan. So in terms of touch points with the board and the committees, obviously we're here kicking the project off in September. The next touch point will be in January when we come back to you and share those guiding principles, the goals, and what we've learned from the communities in our initial outreach about those goals. Which are the more important goals? What should guide this process from the public perspective? And we'll come to you at your retreat in January to present on that. The next touch point will be that draft cost feasible plan in June of next year. And then the final one is the plan adoption in November of next year. So that's all I have for you today, but I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Here.
About NIMS?
No.
I'm just-
Although the parade was excellent.
Yes, it was.
Should have been there. The question, will this plan have projects?
Absolutely.
Or is it just,
Yep.
so in this plan, we'll actually see the projects?
Absolutely. The federal requirement for long-range transportation plans is that we have a cost and revenue balanced plan of actual improvements. We're using revenue projections provided by the state and developed by us for local revenues, and actually build a plan that is, in theory, cost feasible.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Anybody else have any questions? Thank you very much.
All right, thank you.
Just a couple comments.
Please.
There. This actually will be a fairly interesting one for us to develop. I think for as long as I've been doing this, this is the first time we've seen one where we have less revenue than we had in the previous plan. That in itself is going to present a unique challenge. But more than likely, I think Orange Avenue should stay in there because I know that's what.
There you go.
Mr. No, that's on your mind. But
You read my
just to
mind.
kind of give you a lay of the land, this is going to be a bit more challenging, I think, than the ones we've seen in the past.
And pipeline sometimes means pipe dream.
Hopefully not, but, well, and that was the one thing, the top two projects on that list right now were the last two pieces of Capitol Circle, which are funded for construction. So then we get into Crawfordville Road, Orange Avenue, projects like that. So but we don't anticipate anything dropping out. The bigger issue for us, and this is kind of statewide, is getting some of these projects like Capitol Circle Northwest, for instance. It generally probably won't make the cost feasible plan, but we've got to start somewhere putting that into the pipeline, so to speak, through the PD&E process and things like that. So those are some of the conversations we'll be having with DOT and Federal Highway as we develop the plan.
Sounds wonderful. Thank you. Any questions for Mr. Slay? Hearing none, we're going to move into E.
Yes, ma'am. This is the North Monroe project. Before I turn it over to Mr. Burke, as you recall, this is one that we submitted a $21 million Safe Streets for All application for. We found out about a week and a half ago that unfortunately we were only awarded about $200,000. That was for the part of the project that we had listed as a demonstration, which involved adding some temporary to become permanent medians along sections of North Monroe. Brian will talk a little bit about those in the presentation, but just to give you a heads up, we did apply for the money, only wound up getting about 1%, so hopefully we can take another run at it in the cycle next year. With that, Greg, I'll turn it over.
Good afternoon. About a year ago, we initiated this project that looked at a comprehensive safety analysis of the North Monroe corridor. Ultimately, we have completed the project. The project was developed by RS&H. With us today is Brian Powers, who's going to talk about the plan and some of the findings that we got. And interestingly enough, I've said this before, but how exciting would you think a safety plan could be with some of the improvements? But actually looking at the corridor and looking at the needs of that corridor with regards to safety, particularly for vulnerable road users, we actually came up with some good things. So again, with that said, turning it over to Brian.
Excellent. Thank you both. So
Thank you very much for the intro and ripping the Band-Aid off and removing all the suspense from my presentation a little bit there. Basically, as was mentioned, we are looking at a project that was identified as part of the high injury network, and related to that, we wanted to identify a series of improvements, understand the conditions along the corridor, and start to leverage some local funding in order to get federal funding. As we mentioned, didn't get quite as much federal funding as we were hoping for, but we'll review as we go through. So up on the slide now is basically just a little agenda overviewing our project purpose, our study area and conditions, a little bit of an overview of specifically what we did, and then some of the improvements and costs that we came up with. So generally, our purpose was to improve safety along the North Monroe Street corridor, and I won't read everything directly to you, but just to let you know what our purpose was related to a SS4A implementation grant, and with that in mind, we had a very focused effort on the identification of safety issues along the corridor and proven and effective countermeasures that could potentially reduce those from happening in the future. And can everyone hear me okay? On my end, it seems like it's going. Okay, thanks. So as I mentioned, we applied and unfortunately got a portion of it, so it's a bittersweet victory. So our study area, basically our study area is from Tharp Street all the way up to North Monroe / Capitol Circle Northwest. I like to call it the Publix to Publix route, if you're familiar with those two landmarks. Basically, throughout this corridor, it changes from a relatively dense, more urban environment with development directly adjacent to the corridor to a little bit more spacious as we start to get north of I-10, still business-oriented with neighborhoods in the nearby area, and then, of course, getting slightly more suburban as you get up to the north. So one of the things that we wanted to focus on in this area is that there's actually historically disadvantaged populations known in the area, as well as a significant population of unhoused individuals who are not typically picked up in census counts and things of that nature. And so we'll discuss on our attempts to understand the movements of all the folks in the area to make sure that we are identifying not only historic crash issues, but also potentially identifying and limiting the potential for new crashes in the future. So as related to that, we did a standardized crash rate analysis of the area to identify hotspots, and then moved forward from there to talk about near miss, which I'll mention in a moment. So generally, our overall specific tasks related to understanding the previous efforts that were done along this corridor, and I have a slide here in a moment that discusses them, but also there's been lots of development, discussion, continued conversations about this corridor, community involvement, and upgrades throughout the area. One of the major issues along this corridor is actually kind of a piecemeal or gapped bicycle and pedestrian network. So that was one of our main focuses as we were going through, was understanding the movements of everyone along the corridor while having that focus of improving safety and closing some of those gaps. So as I mentioned earlier, we did an in-depth safety analysis. This also included a walking safety audit. We also went through, did a camera count analysis, which I'll do some of the imagery from that, which I find is probably one of the most interesting parts. You get to see where actually people are walking. As talked about earlier, we did our grant, and we identified, as throughout this process, potential improvements along the area, and in coordination with those improvements, potential planning level costs. So these are not inclusive of all efforts that have been along the North Monroe corridor, but we did want to highlight a handful of them. There's median modifications that were basically just finished recently, addition of aesthetic medians improvements. There's planned to increase the sidewalk network on the western side of the sidewalk area from John Knox to Lake Shore. That's actually currently an FDOT project. Improvements near our study area, such as the mid-block crossing at Lake Ella. And I mentioned that one specifically because mid-block crossings were one of the items that we felt were probably the most important in the area, just given our crossing distances. And several outreach events and safe routes to school efforts. And In our images there, I think I heard behind me the horse image as well. I wanted to include that because actually equestrian use has happened along the corridor. This is a picture of some folks riding their horses along our corridor. Though it's maybe not an encouraged use, but we did want to have that in there. The image on the right is just showing some of the crash clustering. You're not intended to read or differentiate every single crash there, but I just wanted to highlight what we're seeing. In general, intersection areas, because there's higher conflict points, those are the areas where you're going to see clustering across the board. This corridor is no different in that regard. So intersection areas, median openings, things of that nature, where there's conflicting traffic flow or movements that are maybe into other traffic lanes, making a left-hand turn, things of that nature, those are inherently more prone to have crashes at them. So you can see that we had over 3,000 crashes over a 7-year period within our study area. Most common was rear end. That's pretty common for a corridor area with many traffic signals. Where it starts to differentiate itself a little bit is when we start to get down into our bicycle and pedestrian crashes. As you can see, those are pretty significant numbers, 21 bicycle and 54 pedestrian crashes, of which 8 of them were fatal. And this is a big impetus on why it originally queued off in the high injury network for the vulnerable roadway users, and is something that carried throughout our process as well. So just another couple of images moving along the corridor, just showing crash clustering in certain areas along the corridor.
Would you like to go now?
Oh, no.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And if there are questions as I'm going, I'm more than happy to answer as we go through. So talking about crash rates and crash clustering, this is one of the things that I think really helped us as we were starting to think about where we needed to do more in-depth analysis. And as you might imagine, when you're looking at the corridor, the densities south of I-10 are the development, the housing, and everything along those lines is more significant in that area. There's lots more signalized intersections right there, tighter roadway widths. So that's actually where our crash clustering is primarily happening. And that actually helped us identify certain locations where we were thinking of putting our camera analysis, which I'll talk about in just a moment. In addition to known data and historic data, we wanted to make sure that we were understanding the conditions for and in relation to a vulnerable roadway user. So we had a group of planners, engineers, law enforcement, elected officials, and members of the public actually joined us. We wanted to understand what the conditions were. This helped us identify things as minor as understanding that there was maybe an ADA, the detectable warning surfaces, maybe it was worn or broken. Things like that are not available if you're cruising along the corridor or looking at aerials. We needed to make sure that we understood what the conditions were. One of the big parts of this that I found the most beneficial was actually interaction with the law enforcement officials, understanding their involvement along the corridor, their high enforcement emphasis areas, understanding their efforts with the homeless outreach street team. So some of the representatives with us actually were very engaged with some of the population along the corridor, and they were able to point out key locations where crossings were likely going to happen more, key areas where the populations were definitely wanting to move from one side of the roadway to the other or along the corridor. So just identifying a handful of areas. The image to the left is actually just a standardized crosswalk. However, one of our main recommendations that was prolific throughout the corridor was actually increasing the emphasis, so adding the cross hatching, as you've seen in some crosswalks, making sure that they're brighter, they're easier to see for every driver and for the pedestrian to utilize. The image on the right is actually a transit stop. This is up by Sessions Road near the Walmart there. This is looking northward. You can see that the transit stop is that concrete pad to your left, but there is no access pedestrian-wise to the north. So this is just an example of one of our gaps. A couple more examples. The left image is that detectable warning surface or truncated domes, depending upon the way you describe them. And there's also an example of some broken infrastructure that likely was potentially run over a railing that prevented people from falling into the stormwater. These are both examples of purely maintenance-related wear and tear issues. This is where I think it gets really interesting, at least for myself, understanding where the individuals are moving along the corridor. So what we had was a series of 7 camera locations that are listed there. And we wanted to understand not only the volume of pedestrians and cyclists that were going through the area, but we wanted to understand where they were traveling. As you can see, this is right here at the Circle K. You can see lots of cross-cutting, a little bit of use of the crosswalk, but the camera did not pick up very much in coordination with what we'd call mid-block crossings, where individuals are crossing out into the median to wait and then cross over, as opposed to using our crossing areas. Got a few more images here. So you'll see on the left-hand side, that's actually Sessions Road, where there's pretty significant compliance actually with the crosswalk areas. And I will say the yellow lines, those are pedestrians, and the red lines, those are cyclists. So you can see some use of the bike lanes, a little bit of cross-cutting, but over and large, mostly using the designated areas. And on our right-hand side, this is over by Lakeshore Drive. You can see pretty significant use, not only of our crosswalk areas, but also of cross-cutting there, totally avoiding known areas for, or where you would expect to see a pedestrian, further away from the intersection, leaving in a driveway effectively. A couple more examples. Here's another mid-block location over near Lakeshore Drive on the left-hand side. You can see it's a pretty common occurrence, and in fact, today I saw it as well. Individuals will walk across the roadway and stand. In this case, in this particular area, it's a relatively narrow concrete median that's actually angled. So a very unsafe situation to stand in. And so they stand there, wait for traffic to lull, and then jaunt across in this area. Tharp Street was probably our winner if you were to pick a spot for actual use of the crosswalks and bike lanes. Actually pretty significant use there, so we were very happy to see that. So just highlighting some of the movements. The report actually has a breakdown of tables for everywhere that we had the cameras, but just to highlight some of these numbers, we did a weekend and weekday count, so 24 hours each, so even during the night we were calculating what the movements were happening. And effectively, what we're seeing throughout the corridor in an average day, let's say Sessions Road, for a weekday you're seeing almost 80 individuals traveling either as a pedestrian or a cyclist. Then on the weekend, roughly about 70, so very similar. Probably one of the most significant ones you want to take a look at is the bottom right corner, is our Scherer Road, where during the weekday, you're seeing about 240 individuals crossing through this area, and about 280 on the weekend. And what I will say is that we did not differentiate between an individual, so this may be double counting individuals who maybe have gone into a convenience store or have come to a transit stop in the morning and then left the transit stop in the evening. However, for our purposes, these are still counted as trips, and they're just as important as if they had been done by the same person moving back and forth. That was not happening, but just in case. Where we also took this to the next level is a near-miss analysis. We wanted to understand not only the historic crashing and where folks were traveling, but we wanted to understand situations where there were potential conflicts happening. So throughout the corridor, we identified many areas where we dubbed a near-miss incident, where it flags if there's within a couple seconds of interaction of a vehicle. You can see this individual, the vehicles here are stopping. This is over near the Lakeshore area, and the vehicles are stopping, and this individual is traveling amongst them. A couple images, top left, there's actually an individual who's running actually out in front of a freight vehicle. Top right, the vehicle there, the white SUV, actually had to evade this person because they were coming out. I think it was a turning movement. The bottom left shows that area where I was mentioning earlier, kind of that unsafe, relatively thin concrete median area where folks are using to kind of stand as a staging area to then run across the second half. You can see on the bottom right, individuals, one individual who's basically in the median in the farther side in the background, and then closer to the foreground, an individual who's effectively in the center of the intersection. So we've kind of already ripped the Band-Aid off of this particular part, but we did do the grant development, and originally we were asking for about 20 million, well, not about, we were asking for $21 million to correct the corridor and potentially improve and add countermeasures down that would benefit the community as a whole. We received a partial award. This partial award is directly related to the semi-permanent median materials, which I'll show here in just a moment. This is related to effectively not closing, but modifying the medians to directionalize them so that they are not just an empty space in the roadway. There's a clear movement path for each of the vehicles that is intersecting there, and that way it reduces those conflict points. So just a couple of examples. The bottom right, just because I was just talking about it, the directional median opening. So what you see here in the yellow space is actually, these are a material, it's a hard plastic material that is actually bolted into the roadway, effectively creating median space. Typically they have vertical delineators on top of them, similar to what you may have seen in certain areas where there's bike lanes or toll lanes, things like that. That is a good example of a vertical delineator. So they provide a buffer, not a hard buffer, but a buffer that allows people to understand the movement that is desired in this area. Instead of allowing full-on left turns every direction, this is making it so that there's designated left turns from the travel lanes and a right-hand turn out of the side streets. To the left of that, there's the Lake Ella example. We actually recommended and put forward the idea of many mid-block crossings throughout the corridor, just because we have such significant crossing distances between intersections where the crosswalks are. We also, in relation to those, suggested pedestrian fencing. This is very similar, and the example there is actually on Tennessee Street. The example is to channelize the movements of pedestrians to make those mid-block crossings less feasible and less desirable, and making sure that we are allowing people to utilize the infrastructure that is there, pushing them towards areas where their expected movements are, where it's a safer movement, such as a mid-block location where the traffic is stopped, or a crossing area, a crosswalk, where the traffic should be stopped as well, or at least they're expected. Another prolific endeavor that we potentially would improve along the corridor is actually what's a near perpendicular right turn. So along the corridor, there are right-hand slip lanes, which effectively it's effectively a merge onto the traffic. So you move right-hand turn directly into the traffic flow, pending, of course, no vehicles there. These are relatively known crash areas. They're excellent for efficiency. However, they provide and increase the conflict in the corridor. And so what we recommended is a relatively low impact modification to those, in which it actually brings that to a more perpendicular turn. So as opposed to a higher speed right-hand turn and then merge, you effectively will come to a near stop, depending upon, you have a higher field of vision. Instead of looking back over your left side in order to see, you can actually just look left because your vehicle is mostly facing forward, increases the visibility, increases the safety of those intersections. And then top middle is actually another example on Tennessee Street, high pedestrian area signage. In this case, it was a crossbar with a flashing lights as well. So I don't want everyone to read this, and I, of course, won't read this at everyone, but this is within the report. I just wanted to show the prolific amount of improvements that we were identifying along the corridor. In addition to the ones I mentioned there, increasing the crosswalk emphasis, basically adding cross-hatching to them, increasing areas where there were not currently crosswalks and sidewalks. Talpico Road is a relatively new intersection. However, there were no crosswalks at it, so making recommendations such as that. Increasing the, modifying the signals to include leading pedestrian intervals, which typically that is designed to allow the pedestrian or cyclist, if they are using the crosswalk, to get out and announce themselves into the column. It allows for a little bit more time for them to cross and generally creates a safer condition. We've been in coordination with the folks who actually operate the signals, and sometimes this can be done relatively quickly, and other times it requires maintenance of upgrading of materials, depending on what the condition is at each individual intersection. So going through, we also wanted to break out the areas where we identified potential improvements related to mid-block crossings. So these slightly bluer areas, those are areas and segments that we were identifying as potential crossing areas. These mid-blocks would operate in very similar fashion to the one near Lake Ella, is what we were pushing forward, is that effectively it would be a traffic signal for pedestrians. It would stop the traffic on each side. This is as opposed to what many of you may be familiar with, like a rapid flashing beacon. There were areas along the corridor where we suggested having those. Those are the bright yellow signs, bright yellow flashing lights. We suggested implementing those on the interstate ramps because the turning movements there are generally a lot of acceleration, and identifying where pedestrians are in that area is very important. So just to highlight some of our areas and some of the interesting ones we wanted to call out. This is actually right here near John Knox, as you can see on the left-hand side. This is actually Silver Slipper. This is an interesting intersection where we noticed that it actually has a fair bit of those vertical delineators currently, and there's actually a stop sign in the road there, and it actually is the beginning of effectively 2 right-hand turn lanes. We noticed that this might be an opportunity for improvement to actually formalize that and make that into a right-in, right-out area to help increase the safety. Here's an example of one of the areas for mid-block crossings. So effectively, we are looking just south of Scherer Road here, and the yellow in between all the medians, those are those semi-permanent median structures that we identified as well. And on the left-hand side, it may be apparent, but just in case, those are zoom-ins of the red circles areas. Another example of those near perpendicular turns. So what you're seeing here is everywhere we have the dark red that is popping up, those are areas where we're suggesting actually increasing the curb there and making it so that the speeds of those right-hand turns is decreased, increasing that field of vision, increasing the safety of the area. Here's an example right at I-10. You can see on the upper left, that is one of the areas for potential improvement of the RRFBs, the rectangular rapid flashing beacons. What we were also suggesting in this area, because the sidewalk is actually directly connected to the roadway, adding a pedestrian railing on both sides of the bridge there, as well as the pedestrian fencing. This is up by Sessions. What we were recommending in this area, or excuse me, not recommending, but identifying in this area is that there was a potential need for median refuges, reducing the crossing distance if individuals couldn't make it all the way across. There was also, this intersection's at a slight skew. The bottom, it may not be apparent, we actually were suggesting just slight modification to the way the intersection it would be the bottom from the way that we are looking at it. The way the intersection is now, it's difficult to see which direction the vehicles are going. It relies heavily on the use of blinkers to understand what your across the street neighbor is going to do, which, as many of you have been driving in Florida for a long time, sometimes the blinker use is limited in this area. So we were trying to make that a little safer by realignment. Getting to the slightly less fun bit, as we were going through, if we were to implement just about everything that we were looking at, we estimated that it would be right around almost $30 million to do all of the improvements. As you may note, we only requested $21 million as related to the grant, and that's because grants are related to the amount of local match that you were able to provide, so we were leveraging the most of our local match to get as much as the corridor as we could. That's it, and I think I've got one question at least, but happy to answer others.
Yes, sir.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you very much, Brian.
Absolutely.
I really appreciate it. First of all, I want to congratulate the City of Tallahassee for their Safe Streets for All application. And if you were at the Blueprint meeting last time, you probably heard exactly what I'm going to say now. But the city applied for Safe Streets for All funds and got $9.6 million for Jake Gaither. which is a huge win. So congratulations to the city. We're all very proud of that. As for the North Monroe Safe Streets for All application, I want to thank RSNH, I want to thank our CRTPA staff. Over the course of a year, I mean, just working on this very diligently and doing a great job on the application. I'm grateful for the $198,000. It does not in any way fully address the high number of fatalities and injuries on North Monroe. What happens next? CRTPA is going to be meeting with the U.S. Department of Transportation. It's a customary thing. If you apply for grants under this program, you have the opportunity to meet with the Department of Transportation to get feedback on your application. Greg and his team are going to be working with USDOT to have that meeting to collect feedback. Sometimes it's helpful. Sometimes it's pretty ambiguous, but we'll see what kind of feedback we get. After that meeting with DOT, we're going to have another CRTPA meeting. I'd like to hear what the feedback is from DOT on that. And then what I'd like to do is have the CRTPA reapply for a second attempt at the Safe Streets for All funds. The City of Tallahassee's application that got the $9.6 million was in fact a second attempt. So what I think we need to do here is the bulk of the work has already been done. Brian and his team at RSNH have done a great job. Our staff at CRTPA have done a great job. Most of that work has already been done. When the time's appropriate, I'd like to have a motion at a future meeting to talk about reapplying, just so you have direction from this board on what to do. I'm also going to advocate a blueprint for retaining that $4.2 million match so that we will have the match going into the second round, second attempt. But the fatalities, the injuries on North Monroe are high. It's part of our high injury network. We all know that. I'm disappointed in the results of this application, but I do think that a second attempt can have some good results. So we'll see how that goes. And with that, I'd like to move option one.
I have a motion and a second. Any discussion? Thank you very much, Brian.
Thanks, everyone.
And Madam Chair, real quickly, I'd also like to thank everyone here on the board for supporting the Safe Streets for All application for North Monroe. It means a lot. It's an area that really needs some solutions, and I'm really thankful for everyone here for supporting it. Thank you, Madam Chair.
You're welcome. All in favor? Aye.
Madam Chair, just real quick, we do have that meeting scheduled with Federal Highway as always call them postmortems to talk about the application, September 25th. So I'll probably to next meeting, I'll be able to.
So Greg, the very comprehensive report that we just received, with the presentation, great job. Is it possible, or was this done in support of the application? Because, reading words on the paper and looking at pictures are one thing, but when you have someone who can speak to it, I think it kind of goes a little bit further. So if in the second round, there's an opportunity for us to make that case to someone, I think that we need to have someone do a presentation like with what we just saw. And anyone who's driven down North Monroe, I was just down North Monroe Saturday night really late, and it happens. You just gotta stay alert, stay woke when you're driving down North Monroe, because people are coming across the street, and I'm not sure why. There are probably various reasons, I guess, get to the other side. But nevertheless, but getting to the other side between cars is increasing your chances of not getting to the other side in one piece. And so I don't know if education or some other things that needs to happen there, or some, we try to scare our kids into driving safely, sharing videos and that kind of thing to let people see what happens when you're not doing what you need to do as a pedestrian. Just something to make the case stronger so that when we go back to ask for more money, that it's understood that this is for real. We really need this money.
Well, as you know, there's not an opportunity to make this presentation to USDOT. We do that through the application, and that was, if you recall, when we did the SS4A plan last year, this was one of our high injury network corridors. That study was at such a high level that we really couldn't go in and pinpoint like we did here. That was the whole point behind this study, was to identify specific improvements, and part of this was developing the application. I'm really anxious to hear what kind of feedback they give us. As Commissioner Minor had mentioned before, we've done that one time when we did, if you recall, about 3 years ago, we submitted a Reconnecting Communities application for Tharp Street that we did not get. So we asked for the follow-up. It's interesting. You can't record it. They don't give you anything in writing. You basically have a person who did not review the report reading a report on your application. So we didn't find that very helpful. But other folks I have talked to, it sounds like it's a mixed bag. Sometimes you get really good feedback, sometimes you don't. So hopefully we can get some good feedback on this one.
And as a follow-up, the other thing is that, you know, bad news travels really quickly and goes viral on social media. So if we're not where we can make the case ourselves, then perhaps the media can help us, as they do help us
Never hurt.
get a lot of other stuff out there, whether we want to or not. And then social media. This is one of the cases where we can use it for good to plead our case to a number of places so that perhaps someone might see it and come to our aid to perhaps assist us, you know, maybe at the federal level, somebody just might be on TikTok or on Instagram or whatever, and might be of assistance. The Assistant Secretary of Transportation at the federal level, as you all know, you may know, he's from Thomasville. So he's very familiar with this area, and he's come here to, you know, bring money in the past. So perhaps we need to reach out, touch someone, save a life if we can. Thank you.
I did want to go back and touch on one thing you mentioned about the education, and I'll give a lot of credit to the host team. That was, I think Brian mentioned this in the presentation. It was very enlightening out there on the street with those guys, because they actually interact a lot with the homeless community, not necessarily writing them tickets, but kind of giving them information about, you know, you need to walk safely. But you saw by what we refer to desire lines, the yellow lines and the red lines on those maps, especially north of Shearer Road, they're just crossing wherever they feel like it, and that's one of the most problematic areas we've got.
Thank you.
Anyone else? Going to move into number 7. You're welcome.
Most important is liaison to the region, Taylor Collins.
Welcome.
Works out of the Shipley office. He's the liaison, planning liaison. The next items are a couple of projects scheduled for that calendar year. First one being Pensacola Street from Railroad Overpass to Stadium Drive. Stadium Drive from Pensacola Street around that first segment, we will be installing 2 block crossings. First between Cactus and Creek Street, and second between Creek and Main. In addition to the services, we will install the second project I'd like to point out is December letting. It's actually the sidewalk along the west side. It goes John Knox, Lake. Sorry, the first project on Pensacola Street sidewalk project.
Microphone a little bit, they're not picking you up. Maybe just pull it closer to you.
Bring it to him.
That concludes
Singing
the
to it. No. Say it again so it's on the record.
These are all public. No, the Pensacola Street projects are scheduled for November letting. Or the crossing and the North Monroe Street.
Does anybody have any questions for Mr. Polk?
Madam,
Comments? Yes, sir.
I don't have any questions, but as many of you all may know, we are looking at improvements to the West Pensacola Street corridor. And our liaison, Commissioner Williams Cox, is here. I would think that what was just reported would be a part of with our next
Some of the
report.
update that we can provide.
Yeah, yeah.
We had, thank you, Mayor Pro Tem. There was a meeting that was called, a community meeting that was called by one of the developers in that area. And I think this will probably be welcome news that there is
Yeah.
going to be some infrastructure improvements. But I think their primary concern is the traffic, the pedestrian traffic that is existing on West Pensacola Street. But this is good news as well, because hopefully it will help the pedestrian traffic be safer in what they're doing out there, and hopefully prevent fatalities, because we hear all the time about what's happening, especially around Cactus and Dupree, because we know the draw to be there, what's causing folks to be hanging around there. And I also would say too that it's not just homeless people that's there. I'm told that there's some other folks who've integrated that community and may be causing some problems or issues, but their homeless are being, accused of it. But this is good news, absolutely. Thank you.
And just to follow up on that, a couple of things. The mid-block crossings, and I believe there's additional lighting, Brian, correct, as part of this project?
Yes.
Those came out of the roadway safety audit that the department did about 2 years ago now. So a lot of that is getting implemented really in a fairly short amount of time in government work anyway. So hopefully we can see some improvement in that corridor when these are constructed.
And where do we find this online? You mentioned that it's public, so where can we?
It is on the department's website, the segment that relates to our upcoming projects that are scheduled to let. I will say the Florida Department of Transportation does an excellent job of hiding that information, even once you get to our site. I'll be glad to share that direct link with staff and they can provide it.
Please do, thank
Yeah.
you. Having worked for the Department of Transportation once upon a time, you're absolutely correct.
Yes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just want to thank you very much for this updates, both on West Pensacola, which is terrific news, as well as the sidewalks on North Monroe. Also, just want to give a shout out to FDOT for their work on Meridian Road.
Yeah.
It's been quite a bit of time has been spent on that road, but it's not just the road, but also the sidewalks and the pedestrian crossings. So very grateful for that as well. Just wanted to mention that. Thank you, Madam Chair.
You're so welcome. Mr. Slay, we're going to move into your Executive Director's report.
Just a couple of things. In your packet, you see a letter from the governor. Our apportionment plan was approved a couple of months ago. Apparently, there was a couple of other MPOs in the state that were holding up all the rest of us. But we're good for another 10 years on that particular aspect. And that's just, in essence, our plan that shows how the governing board is structured and some of our bylaws and related to that. We are actually right now working with city and county staff. This goes back to some of the concerns that were raised, I think more so in the city commission about pedestrian safety, going through and looking and trying to develop a similar plan to what we did with North Monroe, but focusing on city and county roads and a couple of state roads, with the ultimate goal of developing a Safe Streets for All application for same type thing, more localized roads as opposed to state roads. And finally, we've got and Suzanne wrote this, first ride at St. Mark's Trailhead from 10 to 1 on October 5th. We'll be there doing helmet fittings. And Suzanne, I cannot read what the bottom of this is. Okay, and information will be, okay. Yeah, well, last year we did about 50 helmets or so. We did a lot of kids with helmets.
Yes. Yes.
All right, thank you. All right, thank you, Madam Chair.
You're so welcome. Anybody else have any questions for Greg or staff? All righty. Number 10, CRTPA information.
I believe that was just it, just our future meeting dates. More than likely, we will cancel your October meeting. That's okay with you guys? Unless you really want to meet, we can come up with something, but we don't think we're going to have anything pressing. We'll give it a couple of weeks to make sure, but 95% chance we'll cancel.
Okay. Those CRTPA committee actions. Utilization report? Correspondence?
Just the governor's letter.
Any items from CRTPA board members? Talk about airplanes, trains, railways. You done with that today?
You want me to?
But I love you. He covered it well, really well.
I'm
He's
ready.
got like 2 meetings in a row now on it.
It's
Anything
your
for you,
turn.
Commissioner Maddox?
It's my
Your turn,
turn.
Commissioner.
I second that emotion.
There you go. Yes, sir.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
You're welcome.
And this is anecdotal, but it seems like almost every day, at least twice a week, somewhere on I-10, there is a major accident that stops traffic, blocks a lane or something like that, largely in the Leon County area. And so I was wondering if we could get information at a future meeting about if we know what causes that, if we know is that a higher rate of accident than other places. It's just something that we see a lot, and perhaps there's something we at least need to be informed about. I know it's a federal highway, but I would like to find out more about that and if that's in line with average accidents.
Yeah, we can look at that and see. And Brian, did you? Yeah, we can look.
We're seeing that all throughout the Panhandle along I-10. In fact, we have an emphasis on widening that corridor through our strategic intermodal system. We have segments in Escambia, Santa Rosa, Okaloosa, as well as Gaston, Leon, Jefferson, widening. We see that. That is predominantly related to the increased traffic along the corridor. It's causing the delay. Whereas before an accident scene, pull it off to the side, there's a certain amount of friction there, but traffic was able to sustain its flow. At this point, the congestion is just too great to overcome even minor accidents at this point in time. We've been told to focus on this corridor, this funding.
Just real quick to clarify though what Brian said, construction is not imminent. They are working through the process, but
That is correct. When
I just want to make sure for those that are listening.
Similar
It'll be
to
10
Jack's
years from now.
long-range plan, we look out 20-plus years to allocate.
That's pretty much what I need to know.
And Madam Chair?
Yes, ma'am.
I alluded to that I worked in transportation, Department of Transportation at one time. The safety office is where all accident reports go, and they keep, collect that information to determine what are some of the causes in all accidents. And, in city streets, or county streets, it could be, lighting, the traffic light timing or what have you. But on a stretch like I-10, Madam Chair just said, it's this. This is what it is. And until we figure out that that's dangerous, including myself, then that's what it is. And then when there's an accident, everybody wants to see what happened. So, it's the rubbernecking that takes place. So it's a lot of it is is as much as anything else.
But we can definitely pull together some data for causation and just give you a brief report on that at our next meeting.
Anyone else? Look at there. Look at that clock up there.
Wow.
Right on time.
Such an efficient.
I know it, exactly. Can I have a motion for adjournment, please?
So moved.
Thank you very much.
The Coxes got it.